afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. And you?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
So let's
No
get
problem.
started.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, okay. So generally, when you think of Indonesian people, you think that a lot of them are very polite, kind. Yet towards me as a foreigner, generally they are very respectful. So I'm also very respectful to them. Culture-wise, Indonesia is full of a lot of different cultures. So wherever you go, you always learn something new, which I find quite interesting. And habit wise, yeah, there are some good habits and bad habits, like all cultures, Western or Southeast Asia or anywhere else. But generally, I can get through, or I'm used to these kind of habits anyway already, yeah. Yeah, okay. So me being a foreigner, it has its benefits and it has its downsides, right? Like, um, if I was going to give you guys an example, like if I wanted to get something done, generally people would make things happen fast for me if I paid money, right? But the downside is like they always think because of the color of my skin that I have a lot of money. So I guess that's one thing as an example I can give. Um, Generally, I find that for most Westerners, they generally are more attentive to us, or they give us a little bit more respect, just because we're considered as foreigners or Westerners, and technically we are guests in Indonesia, right?
Oh.
So a lot of that basically makes them, want to kind of be nicer to us and stuff. As for glorifying, I don't know. I mean, I guess it really depends on where you are. Not all Indonesian people glorify Westerners. I mean, there are a lot of Indonesian people that don't like Westerners, right? And that can be for a variety of reasons. Some Westerners come here and they're very disrespectful, so obviously the Indonesian people don't like that. Some Westerners come here and they're not adapted to the culture yet, or they don't understand the culture, so they make mistakes, which shows disrespect. So I wouldn't say all Indonesian people glorify foreigners or Westerners, but there's definitely sometimes an advantage for me as a foreigner here. My wife likes to call it white privilege.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I've been living in Indonesia for 23 years now, and that's a very long time. So I've had a lot of experiences here. I've had a lot of good experiences. I've had a lot of bad experiences as well. Overall, I really enjoy living here. It's very different from Western culture, because Western culture, for me, I see it as it's quite strict, and there's a lot of rules you have to follow and procedures you have to follow. Living wise, it can be a little bit more expensive as well. So I find that Indonesia is still more suitable or more comfortable to live in. Um, that's an interesting question. For me, adapting to culture is not very hard. And the only reason is because I grew up internationally already. So from the age of 5 years old, I was already living abroad. So it's been part of my life to adapt to many different cultures, and I've done a lot of traveling. So when it comes to adapting to a culture, it's not very hard for me personally. I don't know about other foreigners. I can give you an example. When I moved to Papua, so I used to live in Papua, in Raja Ampat, because I was working there as a diving instructor. When I moved there, culture in Papua is very different, right? The people are very different as well, in my opinion. Yeah, but it was very easy for me to kind of connect with them and to adapt to how they live and the way they live their lives, just for the fact that I have experiencing in adaptation to culture and people. and that's why I'm generally considered quite a people person. Okay, so I'm going to flip your mind a little bit here as well.
Okay.
Uh, I never got culture shock when I moved to Indonesia.
Really?
Never, no. There was nothing that really shocked me about it. Before Indonesia, I moved to Africa, right? And moving to Africa was a big change, but I was so young that it was easy for me to adapt to the culture there because I was young, right? And because I was used to people being different from me and living a different way of life, maybe not always having the things that I was able to have, like a nice house. You know, in Africa, there's a lot of poor people. When I moved to Indonesia, you know, it wasn't very different for me. It was like just moving, but to a different country, different people, but it never really shocked me. For me, what happens is actually I get reverse culture shock. It's when I go back to the UK for a holiday, I feel different in the UK because I've never really lived there long enough to say that I'm really British. Yeah, like I was born in the UK. I lived there until I was 5, and then I left. Yeah, so I never had any like roots in the UK. So when I go back to the UK for a holiday, I feel like an alien. You know, because
Yeah.
everything is so different. Everything is so organized, on time, clean. You know, transport is set. Public transport's very useful in the UK. You know, like taking trains, buses, everything connects itself.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different lifestyle, right? And for me, I get culture shock when I go home. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So getting culture shock in Indonesia actually never really happened for me. It's whenever I go home to the UK. Until now, like when I go home to the UK for a holiday, I get culture shock because I'm going from you know, from an Eastern culture, I go to the Western culture, and for me that's culture shock. You know. Well, influencing factors that cause or that yeah factors that influence culture shock, from my opinion, you know, it could be the choice of country that the person lives in, you know. If you come from the UK, yeah, and you've never left the UK, moving somewhere like Asia straight away, yeah, it's a big change. There's a lot of differences, you know, the way things are done is different. It can also be sometimes a little bit more complicated, you know, to get things done here. So what influences culture shock is how much traveling you've done, in my opinion, you know. Personally, I would say no, right? If you always live in a safe zone your entire life, how will you grow? You know, if you are offered a job in a really nice company, but you're still new, in like you just fresh graduate, yeah, and you're scared to do it because you're scared you'll fail, yeah. If you don't try, how will you ever know? You know, if I don't move to another country, how will I know if I like it or not? Culture shock isn't always a bad thing, but it's an experience for us to learn more, to grow as a person, right? And you know, when a culture shocks you, what we generally do as human beings is we begin to adapt, or worst case scenario, we don't like it, we leave, you know. But at least then we've learned about something, you know. Oh, you know, I don't like Indonesia because you know. There's too much traffic. I can't live in that traffic, right? It's crazy. It drives me crazy. So maybe for them, okay, they go back home, but then they grow a little. Like, hey, you know, I've traveled here. I didn't like it. I came back, but I've seen part of that world. You know, maybe somewhere else there's a place that I would really like. So they might try somewhere else. So it's not always a bad thing to have culture shock. You know, it helps you grow. It helps you to, I don't know. You know,
understanding,
understand cultures, yeah, gain new experiences, gain knowledge,
learn you something maybe.
yeah, learn something. I mean, if you talk to people in America, you know, like you say, you know, have you ever been to Bali? And they'll be like, is that a country? No, it's an island. Indonesia is the country, right?
Yeah.
Because they're so closed off from the world, right? Like, not a lot of people go traveling. And that can happen in the UK and it can happen in Europe as well. So, yeah.